Chapter 1166, back with a bang, and technically back with a whimper as well, I guess, since we left off with xebec's defeat, so he's not really in any state to continue fighting. There isn't much One Piece news to talk about outside of the manga, apart from the fact that the man who, to the best of my knowledge, was the one who was mostly responsible for the reinvention of the anime at the beginning of Wano, Tatsuya Nagamine, sadly passed away at only 53 years old. He passed in August, I believe, so his family were given time to grieve. I don't know if that's a normal thing in Japan to wait a few months to announce it publicly, but in the West, news outlets would be salivating at the chance to break the news of somebody's death as soon as they could. So it's nice that they did have time before it became public. So he also directed episode 1071, which was Gear 5's debut. He's obviously also worked on other major series as well, such as Dragon Ball, but if you look at the One Piece anime now, compared to how it used to be, he is the one who deserves the credit for that. And speaking of, this isn't really news, but the anime has begun adapting more than one chapter per episode, which is unheard of. It's miraculous. That being said, the anime is on break this week, but if that means better paced episodes leading up to the end of Egghead, going into the 3-month break, then I am all for it, and regardless, the breaks have never bothered me. But with chapter 1166, here we are now closing the chapter that tells the story of the God Valley incident. There's a color spread this week, which is apparently meant as a way for Oda to thank the readers for the overwhelming positivity and popularity that the elbaf arc has received so far. It's a standard spread though, the Straw Hats as usual vibing, the East Blue crew specifically eating some sweet potatoes with Yamato Tama and a fat Shinobu. Maybe she's developed a really fast metabolism and so she can switch between her slim and not so slim appearances, or not, because it's just a color spread, so who really cares. Now to the main chapter. It opens with xebec, who we have gotten the official color scheme of on the cover of the magazine this week, and thanks to those blue streaks in his hair, the Davy D Buggy theory is not dead yet. Anyway, he is lying on the ground, same with Garp and Roger, and while this means their attacks were not enough to kill him, they were enough to turn him back to normal, which was one of the big questions. How do you turn them back without killing them? So the dummy reversi has been undone. He's not dead. Does that mean the key to turning dummy reversied characters back is to use an overwhelming amount of haki as well, the same as if you were trying to kill them? Because Roger and Garp were going for the kill here even if they did fail. So if that's the case, where's the line between using enough haki to turn someone back to normal and using too much haki to the point where they are killed? For example, if a civilian was dummy reversied, they are hit with haki to undo it, but they're also a civilian, so any amount of haki would kill them. Did xebec only manage to turn back because of how strong he is himself? He could take the amount of haki needed to undo the dummy reversi compared to this hypothetical civilian who definitely could not take the required amount of haki needed. So in summary, there's a threshold for the amount of haki needed to turn someone back, and whether you're killed or not depends purely on how strong you are yourself and whether you're able to take that required amount. This is only one possibility as well. I think there is a chance that there may be multiple ways to undo the dummy reversi. To bring Luffy back in, I'm not a fan of the idea that only he would be able to do it with his nika powers, but thematically I do like the concept of Imu having to force these people to turn while Luffy wouldn't force them to do anything. Him being himself would turn them back. So that idea would be walking a very fine line, you know, because while the symbolism is nice, it's also incredibly simple. And as I thought, the Holy Knights were still on the island, so Imu did leave them on cleanup duty. I'm still coping and saying the combo attack did a number on them, which forced them to leave in Saturn's human form for their own safety, well-being or something. Either that or it's just pure arrogance, you know, the hubris of everyone who's high up in the government thinking they're too good for something. Imu believes that this is so beneath them, that dealing with the aftermath is so beneath them, that is, since they did see fit to intervene before. But as I said, it's the cleanup, so they're gonna delegate that to somebody else. Why should they have to do that themselves? And to be fair, it's not as though the Holy Knights are a bunch of nobodies. It's not like Charlos was left to take care of whatever was left of xebec. The fight left all of them, xebec, Roger and Garp, near death. breath, so people of their stature should theoretically be able to finish things off with no issues whatsoever. Anyway, xebec is talking to himself here about how it didn't work out, but also that Roger and Garp should run because they are not to die here. Does him saying this mean that those two should run just so they can live on, as in nothing grandiose, just go live your lives, telling them to leave basically, or is it once more something to do with fate, xebec's favorite thing, fate? Those two aren't fated to die here. And so we have now reached the inevitable point in time where we must say goodbye. To date, one of the most influential characters this story has ever known, his reputation built up to be as great as Roger's, and he lived up to those expectations. He eclipsed those expectations even. Some say he is the new metric, the new benchmark. Some also used him to downplay other characters such as Roger, which I don't agree with, but he left his mark, more than a mark. Think about the asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs, a rock 6 to 9 miles in diameter which left an impact crater up to 124 miles in diameter. That's the size of the impact he has had in the past few months. He stole the show just as we expected him to. I mean, he built the show, he built the Rocks Pirates and shaped an era. Someone so charismatic that readers seem to forget he was also one of the most heinous individuals to sail the seas. But that's what makes him such a great character, and now 12 chapters after his full introduction, he meets his end. But before he draws his final breath, xebec's final words are to thank Roger and Garp for stopping his rampage. So one positive I can find in their attacks not working is that he isn't going to die as a demon who's lost his mind. He's going to die as himself in his own state of mind. As Garling, head of the cleanup crew, lands the final blow to extinguish the flame of Davy D. xebec. And it's Rayleigh and Gabon who carry those two away, so this was the last chance for Bogard to prove he had any worth, and he failed miserably. But it's clear that it's not just Roger but the rest of his crew as well who had a strong level of respect for Garp despite them being on opposing sides. And the two of Roger and Garp both ask about xebec's status, with Rayleigh saying he was killed, but he doesn't mention Garling or the other knights. So is he hiding the fact that xebec actually survived so Roger and Garp don't beat themselves up over the fact they could have actually saved him? So this sounds like the moment, the action that earned Garling the moniker of the champion of God Valley, the fact that he landed the killing blow. I doubt the celestial dragons, or honestly even the five elders, even cared about the circumstances surrounding it. Like Garp and Roger fighting him, which we know isn't public knowledge in the lower realm at least. I would assume there are some celestial dragons still alive who were there that day. It's not like the celestial dragons have their history books wiped, because I doubt they even had history books in the first place. So some of them may know details of what happened, but they're too dumb to comprehend it. In one ear and out of the other. The only thing that stuck with them is the fact that Garling, one of their own, finished xebec off, and that's all they care about. Thus you have the birth of the champion of God Valley, the man who ended xebec. However, as upsetting as it is to see this great man's death, even though the entire incident was leading up to it, literally, I am certain that's not the last we will see of him. For one, there's the idea that we may revisit this incident in the future, but from another perspective. But while that's just an idea, there's the guarantee of getting the rest of Blackbeard Marshall D. Teacher's full backstory, which, should it begin with his birth, xebec should make an appearance there. But also there still is more to see from xebec later on in this very chapter, so moving forward. And the island formerly known as God Valley, named after its abundance of natural resources, has now sunk into the sea following the destruction caused by all of the fighting. I think this is a very reasonable explanation for the island's disappearance without the presence of an ancient weapon, and it's also just a really cool indicator as to how strong these guys are when none of them, bar xebec himself, were in their primes. The curtain falls on this incident. We see a collection of characters, the main players of this day, and the narrator draws attention to the detail that the skies had split open, but with some huge streaks of lightning. So I'm sure this is a result of Garp and Roger's final attacks, but there's two ways I'm looking at it. Either the skies split again solely from their attack, and it was so immensely powerful that it caused lightning to rain rain down on top of the clouds parting, something we've never seen before, or the clouds didn't merge again after the sky split from last chapter, and following their combo attack it meant that those two caused a sky splitting event while the sky was already split, which is what caused the lightning, so sky split squid. Either way, the magnitude of that fight caused a never before seen phenomenon as everyone goes their separate ways, many of them who are just beginning their own story. And speaking of, we have reached the scene depicted in Oda's sketches from volume 4 billion, and in 2 seconds of film red, the Roger pirates are celebrating their haul, a well-earned haul as well I would say, and Roger without his mustache, so no Dennis from SpongeBob here. He doesn't force himself to grow one. They waited until he woke up to look through their spoils, and some noises can be heard from one of the chests, and in the exact same way he opens this chest to uncover the child of prophecy, or a child of prophecy, whichever one Gaban said back in chapter 1152, and it's still unclear what he meant by that, whether he meant it was fate that led him to being found by the Roger pirates and that's it, or if it extends further than that and it has something to do with what Roger told him after finding Laugh Tale. I've always thought Roger told him about the truth of where he came from, his lineage, but there's a strong possibility that there's more to it than that, like maybe it has to do with why Shanks put off finding the One Piece. Maybe Roger gave him a mission, but this is the true beginning of Shanks' story. Dragon led the prologue, and now it's time for Shanks to lead the first act with the Roger pirates. Then we get a mini reaction piece, nice timing as well since Vegapunk's message was just interrupted in the anime. The whole world is reacting to the news. Gob's fame is at an all-time high. The defeat of the Rocks pirates, a group so monumental that it was impossible to wipe their existence from history, or their captain's existence. From the books, yeah, but from the minds of the people who lived through that era, that's not so easy. Especially since this was only 40 years ago and not 800. Some time has passed now, and at Marine HQ, Garp is reading the newspaper where, even though he's now framed as the hero, and even though he did play the biggest role on the day alongside Roger, the story told here is not the truth, and Sengoku is there to try and talk sense into him. And when I say sense, I mean he's trying to tell Garp to know his place just as he does, which was never gonna go down well. Sengoku's point boils down to Garp's cries being pointless because the organization is simply too big, but Garp basically tells Sengoku the same thing he told Roger. He's yelling from the bottom of the cliff, but there is a lot to protect down there. And using that metaphor, the bottom of the cliff makes up like 95% of the Marines' numbers. There's no way Garp is just going to abandon all of those people. But what's more surprising to me is just how much Sengoku was okay with the status quo. We always knew he wasn't as rebellious as Garp since he did make it to Fleet Admiral, and maybe as he got older and as he moved up the ladder, he did realize what was going on and how bad it was. But here, I don't think it's as bad as Kizaru's cog in the machine dilemma, but saying he would turn a blind eye is crazy. And now for the extra bits of xebec, we see that Loki remained persistent in his pursuit of joining that man's crew. So after being bludgeoned and being stabbed by the man, I guess the pain of xebec's attacks did not hold a candle to the pain of his entire life, but he was also under the impression that xebec was Nika, the destroyer variant of Nika. And if you remember, he was listening into xebec's conversation with his father Harald when he first showed up on Elbaf, so that gave him purpose. He had something to work towards. After that day, he probably heard stories of the destroyer Nika growing up. Well, not stories, but rather it seems very plausible that the giants would have called Loki the destroyer version of Nika because of all the misfortunes that befell Elbaf after his birth. So that was the only thing he really felt any connection with. And then xebec shows up, who's unlike anybody Loki has seen before, and I don't really know how to word this. Loki kind of imprinted his dreams onto xebec, you know, I like you, I want to follow you, you're Nika, and so on. Though he was incorrect, and xebec reiterates that he only wanted to rule the world, conquer it in order to change it. He is no god and he does not want to destroy it. So maybe this is what prompted Loki to begin calling himself the sun god who would destroy Elbaf, destroy the world, because the role did not belong to xebec. It will be interesting to see how much Loki is influenced by him once he's up and active, because it still is the case that a lot of what he did grow growing up was his way of trying to cope with his life. But Xebec also sees fit to mention Harald fits that role of a destroyer better than him thanks to Harald's own power, and I appreciate the inclusion of that, since even though this is before their fight, it seems it shows Xebec never gave up on him, and it means even more given what we see Harald do later on. But he also brought up the legendary giant shipwrights Galela, and he called them destroyers, who can only be awakened by Harald. I assume that responsibility now falls onto Loki in the present, but to call these shipwrights destroyers, they're a mix of giants and ancient giants, so they would undeniably be strong, but does it go beyond that? Are they individually super powerful, or did Xebec say this because of what they could create, such as an ancient weapon, Pluton, their masterpiece, which now rests under Wano? But that is one more thing that Xebec's plan included that he didn't have come God Valley, and his answer to Loki's question of why Harald wouldn't work with him because of love is also a nice touch, because it was love which Xebec found with Eris and Teach, his family, that forced him into action on God Valley way before he was ever ready, leading him to an early grave, which is what Loki is crying about now as he reads the paper. Harald, who we are seeing again for the first time in 7 chapters, is dealing with a giant plundering a human town, and with the news of Xebec's death, his friend's death, even he, as a man suing for peace, is overcome with anger, and he takes it out on this other giant. And it isn't just anger but guilt as well, since his efforts for peace meant he could not help Xebec, so he's now doubling down in those efforts. No giant will be forgiven should they stand in his way, hence the beating this giant received. But this is Harald saying he will get this done. He didn't help Xebec because it would screw with his plans. Xebec, who he finally called his closest best friend, it took the man's death for him to finally admit it. So now he will achieve his goal no matter what, otherwise Xebec's death would have been for nothing. And speak of the dragon, elsewhere we see the aftermath of his actions back on that marine ship, where he seemed very prepared to take on the entire world in that moment. The adrenaline from everything he went through had spiked, but it seems he was very quickly forced right back down to earth since he is now imprisoned. And enter his father, now the hero of the Marines, who has come to visit his son. This so heavily reminds me of how he visited Ace when he was locked in Impel Down. Looks like that time, before Marineford, was not Garp's first rodeo. He visited family behind bars before, so the Monkey D family, father and son, one of the most anticipated character interactions in the story. It technically still is, because I really want to see them interact in the present, but I am also really happy to be seeing it here. Garp breaks his son free. Dragon makes his decision to quit the Marines while at the same time seeming to sever his ties with his father, and all Garp can do is accept it. We've seen him to be so passionate about the way he wanted Ace and Luffy to grow up. I assume he was the same with Dragon, and yet when Dragon says to his face he is leaving and he hates him, he just has to take it, because while Garp is staying for the sake of the men and so the Marines aren't completely corrupted, even he can't blame his son in this moment for wanting no part in it. And I get the feeling Garp knew this would happen when he went to free him. And again, I'm thinking back to Ace, who he did not break out. Now all I'm thinking about is how him saving Dragon and the path Dragon chose to go down, which was destroying the system, compared to Garp's reforming the system he did not approve of. But Dragon is still his son. Compare that to Ace, his grandson, who also went down a path Garp did not approve of, but this was before his imprisonment. We can revisit the topic of what whether Garp did back then was right. I think everyone is in unanimous agreement that he should have freed Ace. I mean, I'd argue that he did. He played his part by letting Luffy punch him down because Ace was freed. He only died afterwards thanks to his own impulsiveness. But what I'm trying to say is that Garp had been in a similar situation before, and he's always been in a tough spot where his decisions have been made for the sake of those he cares for and what he believes, but we've seen that more often than not those two things don't align. And we can also bring in the fact that Garp is imprisoned now himself. Garp has done this situation from all angles, and in none of the cases has everything gone perfectly right. Whenever people like myself say that Garp is one of our favorite characters, the main argument against it have been how some of his actions weren't the right ones, how him doing this means this or that, that. And I just think, remember how Luffy responded to Judge at the end of Whole Cake by saying he was listing Sanji's best qualities? Garp isn't black or white, he isn't purely good or purely evil. These complexities that people use to downplay him are exactly the reason, exactly the things about him that make him such a good character, in my opinion. Finally, we are back on Elbaf and back to the main plot of this flashback. Harald is setting sail from Elbaf. He's made up his mind to devote everything to this cause. He says goodbye to his sons, a scene we have seen previously in chapter 1143, and he sets off for Marineford after his assault on that other giant set him back a bit, since that display painted a very violent picture, leading him to breaking off his own horns in complete rejection of his blood and what it represents, in complete rejection of this world of violence. He offers his broken horns to them as his face is now drenched in blood, a really striking image. He even begs the Navy, the world government, for another chance for himself to atone for the giant's past. The past 1,000 years. I don't know if 1,000 is significant or if he's just rounding the number, but since he does say 1,000, I wonder how much he knew about his own people's history beyond their warrior past, like the Void Century, which falls within that past 1,000 years. Nika is one thing since it's part of Elbaf's mythology, but what about the ancient war? What does Harald know of that, if anything? But he even offers himself up as a slave to show his sincerity. So as we've been saying, it all leads back to his naivety, but in this case, in my opinion, it's not really naivety to do with his ideals of peace, but more so it's a naivety that comes along with his life, the way he's lived, because he's royalty and he's literally always been the strongest. We saw his attitude when he was first introduced, and yes, he has changed, and yes, as he's gotten older, he's seen the uglier side of the world, but he himself has never had to deal with that personally because of his stature, because of his strength. So it's really interesting because from my perspective, Harald saying he would become a slave so he can achieve his dream for peace, on one hand you could say it's a testament to how committed he is to this cause, to ridding the world of violence, but on the other hand you could argue that it's a slap in the face, it's an insult to the likes of Kuma, who went through so much hardship, suffering as a slave, the amount of pain he had to shoulder, that Harald's maybe only saying this because he doesn't understand the true horrors of what it means to be a slave. Nevertheless, this was the moment, xebec's death, which pushed Harald over the edge, and we see how much that affects him here, but only time will tell how much he changes because of it moving forward, how much of a role this plays in the decisions he makes. And the final panel is a shot of Emu's eyes, like they told Xebec, a monarch as malleable as Harald presents a very rare opportunity for them, and even more so as he's the king of the strongest race in the world. So seeing how honestly borderline pathetic he is being here, groveling to them in a good way, as in terms of his character writing, but you wonder how he goes from this to committing whatever error he did in the critical hour, because I believe whatever he did, this error was done intentionally. So what was it that led him to that? So we are now back on track over 4 months after Xebec took over this flashback. It's time to get the ball rolling again with Harald and Loki, and looking over the little details, we know there's still so much to go. We know Harald will revisit Marie Joie for another reverie where he will meet Shanks. What was Shanks doing there back then? We know the Holy Knights are going to get involved with Harald given his futile pursuit of peace. Everything with Loki afterwards, the day 14 years ago where not only Harald and Loki are present, Gabon and Shanks are also on the island. We know Shanks is the one who brings him back 6 years afterwards. What does Loki do when he is out at sea? Who connected him with Mosa? How did those two get to know each other first? Who is Mosa? Because I know that some people begun speculating that Mosa is Eris. So now we have 4 candidates: Yarul, Ida, Shirahoshi and Eris. What are the odds we hit 30 chapters for this flashback? It's outlandish, but we are 100% at the very least going to pass 20. But one last time to Davy D. Xebec, true king of the world, not just through ambition, but through blood right as well, as the descendant of the former king Davy D. Jones, better than than these stories could ever describe him to be. His own story is now done for the time being, but the show must go on.